an immigrant engineer who made America's most expensive bomber invisible to enemy radars, a luxury villa overlooking the Pacific that became a golden cage, and a single email from China that turned the Pentagon's genius into the most dangerous traitor in U.S. Air Force history. This isn't just espionage. This is the autopsy of how brilliance became betrayal. You're watching Spies of War. Here we tell real spy stories, operations, betrayals, and quiet choices that changed lives. If you'd like to go deeper into this world with me, you can subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments. It quietly helps this channel grow and shapes which stories I cover next. October 13th, 2005, 6:17 a.m., Maui, Hawaii. Noshir Gowadia stood on his cliff-edge balcony, watching the Pacific Ocean stretch endlessly. His $3.5 million villa gleamed in the sunrise. What he couldn't see were 6 black SUVs climbing the road toward his driveway, FBI badges glinting in the light. 15:30 Sanya, rehook plus cliffhanger. In 4 minutes, federal agents would seize 500 pounds of classified documents from his home. But to understand how the man who designed the B-2 Spirit's ghost technology became America's most wanted defense contractor, we need to go back 40 years, to when a brilliant 19-year-old from Mumbai believed America would reward genius with loyalty. He was catastrophically wrong. Noshir Gowadia was born into a Parsi family in Bombay, India, in 1944. Poverty, limited horizons. But he had something transcendent, a mathematical mind that visualized airflow, like Mozart heard music. In 1963, at 19, he secured admission to an American engineering program. The journey from Mumbai to New York wasn't just geography. It was a leap across economic universes. By 1969, he'd become an American citizen. Not just on paper, Noshir believed in the mythology of American meritocracy with religious intensity. Work hard, innovate, contribute, and the country lifts you higher than dreams allow. His apartment walls were plastered with fighter jets, space shuttles, and the American flag. His graduate thesis on thermal signature reduction caught the attention of Northrop Corporation recruiters. In 1968, Northrop offered him a position on a project so classified it didn't officially exist. Codename: Blueberry Milkshake. Objective: design something the Soviet Union believed physically impossible. A bomber that could fly undetected through the world's most sophisticated air defense systems. They were building the B-2 Spirit, and Noshir Gowadia would become its invisible architect. The Northrop facility in California looked mundane. Corporate campus, manicured lawns, parking lots. But beneath that facade, America's most advanced aerospace engineers were solving science fiction problems. The B-2's challenge wasn't just radar stealth. Any competent engineer could design angular surfaces to deflect radio waves. The nightmare was infrared detection. Heat signatures from engines that Soviet thermal tracking could spot from hundreds of miles away. Have you ever worked on something so cutting-edge that only 5 people on Earth could understand what you were doing? That's where Noshir lived for 18 years. While neighbors mowed lawns, he designed exhaust systems that made a 170-foot wingspan aircraft look like a bird on thermal imaging. The project consumed him. 14-hour days. He'd wake at 4 a.m. with solutions to cooling dynamics problems that stumped entire teams. His wife complained he talked in his sleep about geometric nozzle configurations. His children barely knew him. But the work, the work was magnificent. The breakthrough came mid-1980s. Noshir proposed revolutionary exhaust design. Instead of traditional circular nozzles radiating heat omnidirectionally, he engineered flat, slot-like exhausts embedded into the B-2's flying wing. Hot gases mixed with cooler air before exiting. and the aircraft's body shielded exhaust from ground sensors. Combined with special infrared-absorbing coatings, the system reduced thermal signature by orders of magnitude. Pentagon generals looked at test data and couldn't believe the numbers. A football field-sized bomber powered by 4 massive engines, registering thermal signatures barely larger than commercial airliners, sometimes smaller. Soviet air defense systems would look right past it. The B-2 program was classified above top secret. Contractors couldn't tell spouses what they did. Security clearances went through FBI, CIA, Defense Intelligence Agency. Noshir underwent polygraphs, financial audits, psychological evaluations. They found nothing concerning, because there was nothing to find. Not yet. In those peak years, Noshir believed he'd found his place in history. He wasn't just an immigrant who made good. He was an American patriot who'd given his country a weapons system that would dominate skies for generations. Statues should be erected, medals awarded, his name whispered with reverence in engineering schools. But that's not what happened. By mid-1980s, Noshir's health failed. A rare blood disorder forced him to step back. He took medical retirement in 1986, trading California's classified labs for quieter New Mexico life. He started Gowadia Engineering, landing contracts with Los Alamos National Laboratory, the atomic bomb's birthplace, now focused on missile defense. But something had changed in Noshir's relationship with the U.S. government, something poisonous. If you've ever poured your heart into something, gave it years, sacrificed family time, pushed health to breaking point, and then watched others take credit while you were quietly shuffled aside, you understand the resentment seed planted in Noshir's mind during those New Mexico years. Around 1993, he had a contract dispute with DARPA, Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. Details remain classified, but court records suggest disagreements over intellectual property rights and payment. Noshir felt owed more recognition, more compensation, more respect. DARPA lawyers disagreed. Standard government contractor clauses. Anything developed under federal funding belongs to the United States. Noshir could consult, advise. But genius flowing from his brain became American. Taxpayer property the moment ink touched paper. The dispute ended badly. Contracts weren't renewed. By 1997, his security clearances were quietly revoked. No dramatic arrest, no public scandal, just a bureaucratic letter. Security requirements changed, and his services no longer required. To outsiders, Noshir was a successful retired engineer. Inside, something corroded. The belief in American meritocracy, the faith carrying him from Mumbai to Pentagon's inner sanctum, cracked like old concrete. He'd given this country the most advanced stealth technology on Earth. They rewarded him with a form letter and canceled badge. In 1999, he made a decision that would destroy him. He moved to Maui, Hawaii, and started building paradise. The property overlooking Waua Bay was spectacular. Cliff edge, floor-to-ceiling windows framing the Pacific, infinity pool merging with horizon. Architectural Digest worthy, where tech billionaires throw parties. Construction exceeded $3.5 million. The mortgage was crushing, $15,000 monthly. But Noshir convinced himself he could manage it. Consulting fees, investments, lucrative private sector work. The house wasn't just residence. It was a statement, a middle finger to everyone who pushed him out. Look at me. I don't need your classified projects. But the math didn't work. By 2002, Noshir was drowning. Consulting brought maybe $8,000 some months, less in others. Property taxes alone, $30,000 annually. Insurance, maintenance, utilities. The villa bled him dry. He took shortcuts. Tax returns showed income far below reality. He set up a shell charity in Liechtenstein, supposedly for children's education, really just hiding foreign payments from IRS. That's when the first email arrived. Simple subject: consulting opportunity, aerodynamics expertise needed. The sender claimed to represent a private aerospace research institute in China. They'd heard about his background and wondered if he might review technical documents for generous consulting fees. No commitment, just analysis. Noshir stared at that email. He knew what Aerospace Research Institute meant in China. He knew civilian aircraft efficiency could be repurposed for military applications. He knew responding meant dancing on the edge of federal export control laws. But $15,000 was due in 11 days. He had $3,200 in checking. When desperation whispers, it doesn't sound like the devil. It sounds reasonable. Just this once. Nobody needs to know. You're not actually hurting anyone. Just theoretical questions, right? That's the voice Noshir listened to when he clicked reply. The first project seemed innocuous. Review thermal performance data for cruise missile exhaust. Recommend modifications to reduce infrared signature. They sent specs. He provided analysis. Careful not to directly copy Northrop materials, using general principles and publicly available research. Payment arrived 3 days later. $8,000. More than 2 months of legitimate consulting combined. They asked for another analysis, then another. Questions got more specific, more directed. They stopped pretending civilian research. By 2003, Noshir was actively helping Chinese military engineers design stealth exhaust for cruise missiles. Technology derived directly from B-2 Spirit work. And he rationalized every step. Between 2003 and 2005, Noshir traveled to China at least 6 times. Pattern: fly Hong Kong, then Shenzhen or Chengdu, where research facilities operated under People's Liberation Army supervision. Chinese treated him like royalty. He was Professor Gowadia, not the discarded contractor America pushed aside. Young engineers hung on his words. Military officers invited him to dinners, toasting his genius. 5-star hotels, restaurants with no prices, gifts calibrated to make him feel valued without triggering moral alarms. In laboratories that officially didn't exist, he reviewed test data from Chinese cruise missiles. He optimized nozzle geometries, those flat, heat-dissipating exhausts he'd pioneered for B-2. He analyzed thermal imagery, comparing American missiles' infrared signatures to Chinese equivalents, explaining how to close the gap. Imagine being invisible your entire adult life. Brilliant, but overlooked. And then suddenly being seen. Really seen. People treating you like you matter. Like your knowledge is precious, like you're not a security liability, but genius to celebrate. That's the trap China set for Noshir Gowadia, and he walked into it with eyes open. Court documents showed at least $10,000 verified payments from Chinese entities. Prosecutors believed the real figure exceeded $750,000, routed through Swiss accounts, Liechtenstein trusts, cash leaving no trail. He used code names in emails. Catch a monkey was a favorite. Traveled on passports showing false business addresses. When U.S. Customs asked about trips, he claimed tourist visits to Chinese historical sites. Never mentioned laboratories, military engineers, or classified American defense data in his laptop. American intelligence wasn't blind. NSA monitors communications between U.S. persons and foreign governments. CIA tracks suspicious travel patterns. FBI counterintelligence watches defense contractors making mysterious trips to adversarial nations. In 2004, Noshir made a mistake. At Los Angeles International, TSA randomly selected his carry-on for screening. Inside, technical documents marked with classification stamps, old Northrop materials from B-2 days. Some bore secret designations, others for official use only. He claimed personal memorabilia, career souvenirs. TSA wasn't convinced. They notified federal authorities. FBI opened preliminary investigation. Over months, agents pieced together damning evidence. Travel records, repeated China trips. Financial forensics, large unexplained deposits. Email intercepts, cruise missile projects, and thermal signature reduction. Customs declarations not matching actual activities. FBI built the case methodically, brick by classified brick. They identified Chinese engineers Noshir worked with. Several had known PLA weapons development connections. They subpoenaed bank records, revealing Liechtenstein's shell charity and Swiss accounts. They interviewed former Northrop colleagues, confirming exhaust design principles Noshir consulted on were derived directly from B-2 Spirit technology. But they needed more. They needed him red-handed. October 13th, 2005. That morning, while Noshir watched the Pacific, FBI Special Agent Robert Hunter reviewed final logistics in a command vehicle 2 miles down the coast. 6 agents, detailed search warrants, Air Force technical experts, IRS investigators. Security cameras showed convoy arriving 6:21 a.m. 3 SUVs from front, 2 from service entrance, 1 blocking driveway exit. Agents in tactical gear surrounded property before the primary team approached. Noshir heard vehicles before seeing them. That distinctive gravel crunch. Too many vehicles, too early, too coordinated. His stomach dropped. He knew. The knock was professional, but firm. FBI, we have a warrant. Open the door. There's a moment when consequences arrive, when all rationalizations, all just this once compromises, all comfortable lies collapse into undeniable truth. For Noshir Gowadia, that moment was 6:23 a.m., watching through his window as federal agents prepared to dismantle his American dream piece by piece. He opened the door. Agents flooded past, search warrant thrust into his hands. One team secured him on his own couch, others fanned through villa, master bedroom, home office, garage, basement. What they found required 3 moving trucks, approximately 500 pounds of documents, computer hard drives, external storage, design sketches, test data, email archives, and, most damningly, recent correspondence with Chinese aerospace entities discussing Phase 2 of their arrangement. In his home office, mounted like a trophy, a framed photograph. Him standing beside a B-2 Spirit bomber at Northrop, circa 1985. Wearing a visitor badge, smiling like he'd conquered the world. An FBI agent photographed it as evidence. The irony was perfect. By 8 a.m., Noshir was in handcuffs. By noon, federal custody in Honolulu. By evening, headlines. Former B-2 engineer arrested for espionage. The villa overlooking the Pacific, symbol of success, monument to brilliance, $3.5 million cage, stood empty, yellow FBI evidence tape across doors. But arrest was just beginning. Because what happened in interrogation rooms over the next 13 days would become its own battlefield. A war over truth, memory, coercion, and whether a confession extracted from a terrified man could send him to prison for life. And at the center, a question that would haunt his son for years. Was Noshir Gowadia a calculating traitor who sold out his country? Or a broken genius manipulated by everyone, including the government now prosecuting him? The answer, like everything in this story, depends on who's telling it. 13 days in a hotel room with FBI agents who held his freedom in their hands. A confession signed in exhaustion that would either save him or destroy him. And a psychological battle where the truth became whatever version could survive a federal courtroom. This is what happens when genius meets interrogation, and nobody walks out the same person. October 13th, 2005, 9:47 a.m. Honolulu FBI Field Office. Noshir Gowadia sat in a windowless interrogation room, still wearing the clothes he'd thrown on when agents knocked on his door 3 hours earlier. His wrists were free, no handcuffs yet. But Special Agent Robert Hunter sat across the table with a stack of documents 18 inches high. Each one bore a classification stamp. Each one had Noshir's fingerprints somewhere in its history. Hunter opened the top folder and slid a photograph across the table. It showed Noshir standing in a Chinese laboratory, surrounded by PLA military engineers, gesturing at a thermal exhaust model. The photo was time-stamped March 2004. Hunter's voice was calm, almost friendly. "Noshir, we've been watching you for 18 months. We know where you went, who you met, what you sold. This conversation determines whether you spend the rest of your life in prison or whether we can work something out." And that's when Noshir Gowadia's nightmare truly began. The interrogation didn't happen in a dramatic, cinematic way. No bright lights, no aggressive shouting, no good cop, bad cop theatrics. Instead, it was methodical, psychological, and suffocating. FBI counterintelligence agents are trained to dismantle defenses the way Noshir once dismantled thermal signatures. Layer by layer, with precision and patience. Hunter and his team moved Noshir from the FBI office to a hotel in downtown Honolulu. The official reason: for your comfort and privacy during voluntary questioning. The real reason: isolation. Cut him off from family, lawyers, familiar surroundings. Make the FBI agents the only constant in his rapidly collapsing world. The hotel room became Noshir's entire universe for 13 days. 2 beds, one for him, one often occupied by a rotating FBI agent who stayed to facilitate ongoing dialogue. A table covered with documents. A bathroom he could use only when supervised. And windows overlooking Waikiki Beach, where tourists splashed in the Pacific while his life disintegrated. What happened in that room would later become the most contested part of his entire case. 2 radically different stories emerged, and both sides swore under oath they were telling the truth. According to FBI reports filed with the federal court, the interrogation was textbook procedural correctness. Agents read Noshir his Miranda rights multiple times. They explained he could request a lawyer at any moment and all questioning would stop. They offered food, water, bathroom breaks. They never raised their voices, never threatened, never promised anything they couldn't deliver. The agent's approach was simple. Present overwhelming evidence. Let Noshir realize the hopelessness of denial and give him a path to cooperation. They showed him financial records proving Chinese payments, email intercepts discussing cruise missile nozzle optimization, travel documents contradicting his customs declarations, testimony from former colleagues identifying his proprietary B-2 Spirit design principles in Chinese military technical papers. Imagine sitting across from professionals who know more about your life than you remember yourself. They've read your emails, traced your money, interviewed your colleagues, photographed your meetings. They don't need you to confess. They already have enough to prosecute. What they're offering is a chance to control the narrative, to explain motivations, to potentially reduce the catastrophic consequences barreling toward you like a freight train. That psychological pressure, the certainty of conviction combined with the illusion of agency, is more effective than any physical coercion. On day 3, according to FBI records, Noshir began talking. Not full confession yet, but cracks in his denials. "Yes, I traveled to China, but only for legitimate consulting." Then, "Yes, I discussed exhaust design, but nothing classified. Then, some of the principles I used were derived from my Northrop experience. But that knowledge is in my head. You can't classify thought. By day 7, he was writing statements in his own handwriting. The FBI provided the framework, questions to answer, topics to address, but the words were his. In those statements, phrases appeared that would haunt him at trial. Looking back, what I did constitutes espionage and betrayal. I shared military secrets with the PRC for financial gain. I knew what I was doing was wrong, but the money blinded me. Agents documented everything. Timestamps on every session, witnesses present for every statement, video recordings of key moments. They built an airtight procedural record showing a voluntary confession from a man who understood his rights and chose to waive them. But that's the FBI's version. Noshir would later tell a very different story, one of exhaustion, manipulation, and desperation that turned voluntary into something much darker. In motions filed with the federal court months later, Noshir's defense attorneys painted a completely different picture of those 13 days. Their client described psychological warfare disguised as friendly conversation. According to Noshir, agents suggested, never directly stated but strongly implied, that if he didn't cooperate, his wife would be arrested as an accessory. His adult children would face investigation. His aging mother in India would be denied entry to the United States to see him before he died in prison. The family home in Maui would be seized. Everything he'd built would be destroyed, and everyone he loved would suffer. The agents, Noshir claimed, mentioned the death penalty, not as a direct threat, they were too smart for that, but as context. In espionage cases involving aid to adversarial nations, federal prosecutors sometimes seek capital punishment. We're not saying that's where this is headed, but you understand the stakes here. When you haven't slept properly in 4 days, when every waking hour is spent with people dismantling your life's work, when every thought of your family triggers images of them suffering because of your choices, your mind doesn't work normally. You start thinking that saying what they want to hear is the only path to ending the nightmare. Even if it's not entirely true. Even if you're signing away your life. Noshir described sessions lasting 8, 10, 12 hours. He'd ask for breaks, but agents would say just a few more questions that stretched into another hour. He'd ask for a lawyer, but they'd respond, "Of course you can have one. But once you lawyer up, we can't help you anymore." The prosecutors take over and they don't offer deals. Was he explicitly denied counsel? No, the agents were too professional for that. But was he psychologically pressured to waive his right to counsel? Noshir's lawyers argued yes, absolutely. The written statements the FBI presented as proof of confession. Noshir claimed he was so exhausted and confused that he signed documents he didn't fully read, trusting that cooperating would protect his family. The phrases about espionage and betrayal? He said agents drafted language and asked him to copy it in his own handwriting, implying it would help his case. So who was telling the truth? The FBI agents with their meticulous documentation and professional reputations? Or the desperate engineer whose entire life depended on having the confession thrown out? The federal judge would have to decide. After 13 days, Noshir was formally arrested and transferred to the Federal Detention Center in Honolulu. The hotel interrogation ended, but the legal battle was just beginning. His family hired defense attorneys, expensive ones, the kind who specialize in national security cases where classified evidence determines outcomes. The defense team filed a motion to suppress the confession. They argued it was obtained through coercion, that Noshir's mental state was compromised. that the FBI had violated his Fifth Amendment rights through psychological manipulation, even if they'd technically followed procedural rules. The prosecution countered with sworn affidavits from every FBI agent present during the interrogation. Each one testified that Noshir was repeatedly advised of his rights, offered lawyers multiple times, and consistently waived counsel voluntarily. The hotel records showed food delivery 3 times daily. Medical examinations showed no signs of physical duress. Video footage showed agents behaving professionally. In February 2006, after reviewing hundreds of pages of transcripts, recordings, and testimony, Federal Judge Susan Malway issued her ruling. The confession was admissible. She found no evidence of coercion rising to the level that would violate constitutional protections. The FBI had followed procedure. Noshir's discomfort and anxiety, while real, didn't constitute the kind of governmental overreach that would warrant suppression. The confession would stand. And with it, Noshir's chances of avoiding conviction plummeted. But the defense had another strategy. If they couldn't suppress the confession, maybe they could argue Noshir wasn't mentally competent to stand trial. They brought in forensic psychiatrists who evaluated him over months. The diagnosis: narcissistic personality disorder. The psychiatric reports painted a picture of a man whose grandiosity and need for recognition had warped his judgment. Someone who genuinely believed the classification rules didn't apply to him because he was smarter than the people who wrote them. Someone who couldn't maintain functional relationships with defense attorneys because he believed he understood the law better than they did. Think about the fine line between confidence and delusion. Noshir had spent 30 years being right when others were wrong. His thermal exhaust design had been revolutionary when conventional wisdom said it couldn't work. His mathematical models proved accurate when Pentagon engineers were skeptical. For decades, his arrogance was justified by results. But that same arrogance, the "I know better than everyone" mindset that made him a great engineer, also made him believe he could trade classified defense secrets to China without consequences, that he was smart enough to avoid detection, that the rules binding lesser mortals didn't apply to genius. The defense argued this wasn't criminal intent. It was pathological narcissism that impaired his ability to understand the wrongfulness of his actions. Judge Malway reviewed the psychiatric evaluations carefully. Then she issued another ruling. Noshir Gowadia was competent to stand trial. Yes, he had personality traits that made him difficult. Yes, he struggled with defense attorneys and insisted on controlling his own case. But personality disorders don't automatically equal legal incompetence. The trial was set for 2010. 5 years of pretrial motions, classified evidence reviews, and legal maneuvering had passed since his arrest. During that time, Noshir remained in federal detention, watching through reinforced glass as the case built against him grew stronger. And at the center of that case was a question that would determine whether he spent the rest of his life in prison. Did Noshir Gowadia knowingly and intentionally provide classified defense information to the People's Republic of China? The prosecution said yes, absolutely. And they had emails, financial records, travel documents, and his own confession to prove it. While prosecutors built their case, Ashton Gowadia watched his father's life disintegrate from outside prison walls. Ashton had grown up hearing stories of his father's genius, the brilliant engineer who made invisible bombers, the immigrant who achieved the American dream through talent and determination. Now that same father sat in federal detention, accused of being one of the most damaging defense traitors in U.S. Air Force history. Ashton refused to believe it. He gave interviews to reporters, arguing the FBI had railroaded his father. He claimed the evidence was circumstantial, misrepresented, taken out of context. My father would never intentionally harm the United States, Ashton told Popular Mechanics magazine. He spent 30 years serving this country. They're twisting his legitimate consulting work into something it never was. When the person you've looked up to your entire life is suddenly labeled a traitor, your brain fights that narrative with everything it has. Because accepting their guilt means accepting that you never really knew them, that the hero was actually the villain, that your entire childhood was built on a foundation of lies. So you fight, you defend, you construct alternative explanations, because the truth is too painful to process. Ashton fought for his father's innocence with the same intensity Noshir once fought to perfect B-2 spirit stealth technology. He organized support from the Parsi community. He crowdfunded legal fees. He sat in that federal detention center visiting room every week, talking to his father through glass and believing the nightmare would eventually end with vindication. But in federal courtrooms, belief matters less than evidence. And the evidence against Noshir Gowadia was overwhelming. By 2010, the prosecution had assembled a case file that filled 3 filing cabinets. They had 41 scheduled hearing days, 6 days of jury deliberation anticipated, and a witness list that read like a who's who of American defense and intelligence. Former Northrop Grumman engineers who'd worked with Noshir on B-2 Spirit development. Air Force technical experts who'd analyzed the Chinese cruise missile designs Noshir had helped optimize. NSA analysts who decoded his encrypted communications with Chinese military contacts. Financial forensics specialists who'd traced money through Liechtenstein shell charities and Swiss bank accounts. The FBI agents who'd interrogated him for 13 days in that Honolulu hotel the defense had Noshir, his personality disorder diagnosis, and a strategy built on arguing that nothing he'd shared was truly classified because the core principles were already in his head from decades-old work. It was a catastrophically weak defense. And everyone knew it, including, probably, Noshir himself. But narcissistic personality disorder has one defining characteristic: the absolute inability to admit you're wrong, even when prison walls are closing in around you. On the prosecution side, the stakes were equally high. This wasn't just about one engineer selling secrets. It was about sending a message to every defense contractor with access to classified programs. Betray America's trust, and we will destroy you. The trial was scheduled to begin August 2010 in Federal District Court, Honolulu. Noshir would face 17 counts: espionage, unauthorized transmission of classified defense information, unlicensed export of military technology, money laundering, false tax returns, wire fraud. If convicted on all counts, he faced potential life imprisonment. His son Ashton would sit in the courtroom gallery every single day, watching prosecutors dismantle his father's life piece by piece. And what the jury would ultimately decide wasn't just about guilt or innocence. It was about a question that cuts to the heart of the American immigrant experience. What do we owe the country that gave us opportunity? And what happens when genius, greed, and grievance collide in one brilliant mind? The answer would come in a verdict that shocked even the prosecutors who'd spent 5 years building the case. Because Noshir Gowadia's confession, his narcissism, and his undeniable guilt weren't the end of this story. They were just the beginning of a life sentence that would teach the world exactly what betrayal costs in the American justice system.